A man invests his savings in two accounts, one paying 6% and the other paying 10% simple interest each year. He puts twice as much in the lower yielding account because it is less risky. His annual interest is $3,520. How much did he invest at each rate? So we want to begin by writing a variable key. So you have to ask yourselves, what is the unknown in the problem? And in this case, the actual question, the very last sentence, is your cue to the unknowns. The question is, how much did he invest at each rate? There's two different accounts that have two different rates, so we're going to have two different unknowns, two different variables. You could use X and Y or A and B. It doesn't matter the variable actual letter that you choose. So we'll have X be the amount of money, the amount of money invested in the first account, which is the account that pays 6% interest. And then Y will also be an amount of money. It's the amount of money that the man invests in the second account, and that would be the account that earns 10% interest. So since we have two unknowns, X and Y, we can expect that we need to write two different equations. So we're going to write two equations that involve X and Y, and that'll be our system of equations. So starting to read the problem again, we see that the second sentence says he puts twice as much money in the lower yielding account because it is less risky. So we need an equation that represents this red circled sentence. There's twice as much money in the lower yielding account than the higher yielding account, meaning if I were to just label my two here, X is the amount invested at 6%, Y is the amount invested at 10%, and we want twice as much in the lower yielding account. That means we want to have more money sitting here inside of the lower yielding account. We need more money there. So often the mistake students make is they just read the sentence from left to right and try to write their equation. And if you were to just read from left to right, you might see the word twice and think, okay, two times, twice as much money in the lower yielding account. If you look at your variables, the lower yielding account was the 6% account, so you might have twice that, 2 times X is equal to Y. And this is often a mistake that students make because they just read the sentence from left to right and try to write their mathematical equation also from left to right. But instead, you really have to think about the relationship between X and Y. So look at this numerically for a second. Okay, when you read the sentence, if we have twice as much in the lower yielding account, again, that means I want to have more money sitting here in the X column. So pick a fictitious number, say $100, $100. Let's say you've got $100 in that lower yielding account. Now, question mark, how much should I have then? What would the Y value be in order for this sentence to be true? We want twice as much money in the lower yielding account. So if there's twice as much money in the lower yielding account, then hopefully you can see that that would mean I would need $50 here in the other account. And that means I have 2 times the amount in the lower yielding account than I do here in the higher yielding account. And now if you go back to your equation that you had written, maybe you had thought 2x equals y, if you were to actually put in 100 here, you'd have 2 times 100 equals my y value, which would mean I would actually have $200. So see, that's not the correct relationship. That doesn't give you more money in the account at 6% interest. So rather than just reading from left to right, you really have to think about the relationships between the variables. So getting rid of that, hopefully that has addressed a common mistake that maybe you would be making. And just thinking about my numerical values here in the table, if I want $100 for X and I want $50 for Y, then what I'm really doing is taking the Y value, I'm multiplying the Y value by 2, and that gives me my X value, and that'll give me a larger X value. So it'd be 2 times Y is equal to X. So that's the first equation, and that's the equation that represents the relationship that I have circled in red. He puts twice as much money in the lower yielding account. So now keep reading. We need to write a second equation. And the second equation comes from the statement that is in the next sentence, which is the annual interest earned is $3,520. The key word here is interest. So because this is the amount of interest that he's earned, then I'm going to have to use the 6% and the 10% here in this equation so I can figure out my interest. So I have X dollars sitting in the one account, but it's earning 6% interest. So I'm going to multiply by 0.06. 0.06 times X will be how much interest I'm earning. Plus, I have the Y dollars sitting in the second account, but that account again is earning 10% interest. So that would be 0.10 times Y, and then that's going to equal the amount of interest earned, which is 3,520. So now, the hard part hopefully is over. You have set up your system of equations. This would be your system of equations, two equations with the same unknowns. And now our job is to solve this algebraically. So algebraically, you have two options, substitution and elimination. But because this first equation in red, because I already have x isolated, x is by itself, a substitution makes the most sense here. So I'm going to go ahead and solve by substitution. So since x is equal to 2y, I'm going to go ahead and take my value of 2y and I'm going to substitute it into my green, my second equation. So that's going to give me 0.06 times what used to be x, but again, I'm substituting. So I'm substituting in 2y in place of x, plus 0.10y is equal to 3,520. And now we just have an equation with one variable, so now we can just solve for y. So 0.12y plus 0.10y equals 3520. Add like terms. So we have 0.22y, and then finally divide. So divide by 0.22. And this should give us y is equal to 16,000. So now two things to consider before you finish the problem. One, you want to make sure that you answered the question fully, and number two, you want to make sure that you have the correct units. So going back to the question, if I highlight, the actual question was how much did he invest at each rate? So it doesn't want to know just how much he's invested in one account, but rather both accounts. So looking at my variable key, y was the amount of money invested at 10%. So my final answer is that we want to invest $16,000 in the account earning 10%. And then going back to that sentence that I've circled in red, which corresponds to my first equation here, we know that we want to take 2 times the y value to get the x value. So if y is 16,000, then that means that we want to invest 32,000 in the account that is earning 6%.